As you know, I'm from another country. I don't know very much about advertising here in the Russian Federation. So I'm going to talk today about my view of what's happening in advertising in my country, and I hope that it has relevance for you here. I've been around advertising and marketing a long time, and I've noticed something. I've noticed that advertising and marketing people have a lot of unreliable opinions. I've had a long, pleasant career in the advertising business. I've had the opportunity to create multi-million-dollar campaigns for successful brands like McDonald's and Toyota and Bank of America and Chevrolet. I've been invited to speak in dozens of countries. My opinions and my comments have been sought by organizations like the New York Times, the BBC, the Wall Street Journal, and other large media groups around the world. I've written 4 books that were #1 sellers at Amazon. Now, I don't say any of this to brag. I say it for the exact opposite reason. I want to make a point. The point is this: I don't know anything. I'm faking it. I always have been. I have no idea why anyone buys anything. I have no idea why you buy Coke and you buy Pepsi, and you buy Nike and you buy Adidas. As a matter of fact, I have no idea why I buy anything. As we used to say in my hometown of Brooklyn, I don't know shit. In my career, I've worked with hundreds, if not thousands, of marketing and advertising people, and I mean no disrespect, but I don't think they knew shit either. I think we pretend to know a whole lot of things that we don't really know. What we do mostly is precision guessing. We guess. We look back at what other companies have done, we study strategies, we study methods, and if it worked for other companies, we try it, and we hope it's going to work for us. We have a fancy name for this. We call it best practices. But the problem is, every company is different, every problem is different, every brand is different, every circumstance is different. And what may be best practices in one instance may be a complete disaster in another. So usually what we do in advertising works a little because we spend money against it, and every now and then something works amazingly well, and we don't know why, but we pretend it's because we're really smart. There are so many variables in advertising and marketing, and our individual successes and failures provide such a small sample that it's hard for us to know what is the result of our intelligence and acumen, and what's the result of luck, circumstances, trends, randomness, or something else. I've had enough successes and failures to know that I never knew what was going to be successful and what was going to flop. No matter how much I thought I knew, I never really knew. Here's an example. There's a guy named Ron Johnson who was head of retail stores for Apple. He pioneered the Apple stores, the most successful stores in the history of the world. After several years, he was hired away from Apple by a department store called JCPenney. Johnson applied all the lessons and all the successful tactics he had used at Apple to JCPenney. Everyone expected an enormous success. And he created one of the most colossal failures in the recent history of American business. In his final quarter as CEO of Penny, their sales dropped an almost impossible 32% in one quarter. If we gave my dog Roscoe an office at J.C. Penney headquarters and made him CEO, and he just laid around and drooled all day, he could not have lost 32% of sales in one quarter. J.C. Penney was wrong, but we don't know why they were wrong. Johnson was clearly a very smart guy, and he applied all the knowledge and everything he had learned at Apple. But like all of us, his experience provided a very small sample, and drawing big conclusions from small samples is always a mistake. And it's not only history that misleads us. The future also misleads us. If you attend a lot of conferences like I do, you have undoubtedly noticed that speakers love to talk about the future. In fact, it's almost the only thing they ever talk about. Why? Because the present is too confusing and complicated and largely incomprehensible. But the future is great. No one can fact-check the future. You can say anything you want about the future, and people will think you're brilliant. And they'll applaud you, and they'll quote you in the news. And then 10 years from now, when it turns out you were completely wrong, who cares? Nobody remembers. So if you want to be a successful speaker, don't be an idiot like me and talk about the real world. Be a genius and talk about the future. We advertising and marketing people are fed so much bullshit on a daily basis that it's important for us to take a step back from time to time and have a reality check. And that's what I hope to do today. Let's see if we can agree that a lot of what we've been told and what we've come to accept as marketing and advertising wisdom is dubious at best and at worst just plain wrong. The title of my talk is Marketers Are from Mars, Consumers Are from New Jersey. This is also the title of a book which I wrote a couple of years ago, and I believe you're going to each get a copy of it later. And the premise is that marketers have lost touch with reality. We're living in a dream world of our own invention in which delusional thinking is not just acceptable, it's mandatory. About 15 years ago, we advertising and marketing people started promising the business community something very special. It sounded great. It was going to be amazing. The digital revolution in advertising was going to be amazing. People weren't going to just look at ads, they were going to interact with them. They were going to share them with their friends, and their friends would share them with their friends, and it would be all viral and wonderful. And social media marketing was going to be unbelievable. We're going to put this amazing new social thing to work for us. All we had to do was put up a free page on Facebook or tweet out some brilliant stuff on Twitter. And we wouldn't have to waste all that money on advertising. A partner in one of the US's most well-respected investment capital firms said, quote, "If you can harness social media marketing, you don't have to pay for advertising anymore." It all sounded so good. But as that old sourpuss Winston Churchill once said, however beautiful the strategy, you should occasionally look at the results. And what have the results been? Well, the results have been substantially less than promised. The results have been tens of billions of online ad fraud, corruption and kickbacks, FBI investigations, billions of bots masquerading as people, ad blocking, privacy nightmares, security breaches, secret files about each of us in the hands of people we don't even know, degradation of journalism, fake news and the disgust of governments, the public, and policymakers. Other than that, it's been great. If we're honest with ourselves, we have to admit that to an uncomfortable degree, the advertising industry has been living in a world of wishful thinking. It's a fantasy land in which we have convinced ourselves that because people want to follow the social media postings of pop stars, movie stars, and athletes, they also want to follow the social media postings of toothpaste, paper towels, and laundry detergent. It's a fantasy land in which people want to engage with our content. A fantasy land in which people want to join the conversation about our brands. It's a world in which our wonderful habit of wishful thinking has replaced common sense. I believe we marketers are suffering from several delusions. Today I want to talk about 3 of them. They are the digital delusion, the brand delusion, and the age delusion. All of these delusions have one thing in common. They take a little bit of truth and they distort it and exaggerate it and torture it to the point at which it does us marketers more harm than good. Before we get to the delusions, let me tell you a little bit about myself so you know who you're hearing this from. I started my advertising career as a copywriter, and through a series of comic mishaps, I wound up as CEO of 2 independent agencies and the US arm of an international agency. Before I began in advertising, I was a science teacher. There were only 2 problems with that. 1, I don't know anything about science, and 2, I don't like children. I later went on to spend 1 year as the special assistant to the executive director of the California Association of Sciences. One of the things that being around science and scientists taught me was a healthy respect for the scientific method. Scientists have to go through years of experimentation and peer review before an idea of theirs is accepted. After years of scrutiny, if their results hold up, they can say they actually know something. Knowing something, it turns out, is completely different from thinking you know something. So then I got into the agency business. And the first thing that struck me was that we really didn't seem to know anything. We thought we knew a lot of things. We had ideas about what makes good advertising. We had ideas about changing consumer behavior, but I couldn't find many facts. All I could find were the assertions and opinions of experts masquerading as facts. We did things that looked and sounded like science. We used the language and the tools of science. We had questionnaires and computer programs and clipboards, but we didn't use the scientific method. We rarely used controls for our research. We rarely repeated our studies to verify them. We never had peer review of our methods or our conclusions. We never asked third parties to replicate our studies to validate them. Now, I'm not blaming researchers for this. It's not their fault that the ad industry isn't willing to pay for real science, but over time it led me to develop an obnoxious habit. I stopped believing advertising and marketing experts. I don't care what their credentials are or how many awards they've won. If they don't have the facts and they can't explain them to me simply in jargon-free language, I'm skeptical. Nobel Prize-winning physicist Richard Feynman said it best. Science, he said, is the belief in the ignorance of experts. So let's get to our first delusion, the digital delusion. Let's have a look at what we've been told for the past 15 years about advertising and how it aligns with reality. In 2004, researchers, Forster and Company, proclaimed that because of digital technology, we had reached the end of the era of mass marketing. I think they must have forgotten to tell that to Apple and Coke and McDonald's and Nike. In 2005, Joseph Jaffe, in his book, Life After the 30-Second Spot, said, "Now is the time to come out of my closet with this emphatic statement. The 30-second spot, at least as it exists today, is either dead, dying, or has outlived its usefulness. Take your pick." In 2008, Seth Godin, best-selling author on marketing, proclaimed the end of traditional advertising. In 2009, Advertising Age said the post-advertising age is underway. Bob Garfield, expert columnist at Advertising Age, said in 2009, the present is apocalyptic. Any hope for a seamless transition, or any transition at all, from mass media and marketing to micromedia and marketing are absurd. The sky is falling. We are exquisitely, irretrievably fucked. I know Bob, he's a good guy, but he really needs a hug. Not long ago, Huffington Post just came out and said it, advertising is dead. So here's my dilemma. I'm confused. Everywhere I look, I see advertising. Just walk outside in any major city. It's on every building, every bus, every t-shirt, every napkin, every corner, every theater ticket. Every square inch of the planet is covered in advertising, and these geniuses are telling us it's dead. If advertising is dead, I'd like someone to explain to me how Facebook and Google, two of the most profitable companies on the planet, make all their money from advertising. In fact, worldwide advertising expenditures are reaching all-time highs. I'm sorry, you can't kill advertising. On that final day when the big flaming asteroid bears down on our poor little planet, there'll be only two things left: cockroaches and copywriters. Along with the death of advertising, we were also promised the death of television. In an article entitled, "Let's Just Declare TV Dead and Move On," TechCrunch wrote, "The writing is on the wall. People want to see the whole show on YouTube. There's a fundamental shift in consumer behavior going on." They wrote that in 2006. From Wired magazine, "Traditional TV won't be here in 7 to 10 years. That was 12 years ago. From The Telegraph that same year, "TV is dying, says Google expert," also from 2007. Also from that same year, Fox News wrote, "The internet is set to revolutionize television within 5 years. That was 12 years ago. Now let's look at the facts. Nielsen's total media study for the first quarter of this year shows that despite the growth of streaming, traditional TV viewing continues to totally dominate television viewing. 88% of television viewing was live or time-shifted on a TV. 12% was on an internet-connected device. Considering total video viewing, 82% was live or on a time-shifted device. 10% was streamed, and the rest was spread among computers, phones, and tablets. Total video viewing dropped about 3% in the first quarter of 2019 compared to the same period last year. Nonetheless, on average, American adults spent over 5.5 hours a day watching video. 4.5 hours of that was with traditional broadcast advertising. In fact, according to the US Bureau of Labor Statistics, in 2018, time spent watching TV exceeded all other leisure and sports activities combined. Let me repeat that. Time spent watching TV exceeded all other leisure and sports activities combined. It's been about 15 years since we started hearing the nonsense about the death of television, and yet every company in creation is now hysterically scrambling to own a piece of the TV pie. Apple is, Amazon is, Hulu is, Yahoo is, Netflix is, Google is. Thinkbox in the UK says TV isn't dying, it's having babies. In the US, many advertisers are struggling with the question of which form of video advertising is most effective at building sales: TV, Facebook, or YouTube. A while back, I had the pleasure of being on a speaking program that included Professor Karen Nelson Field of the University of Adelaide and founder of Media Intelligence Company. Dr. Nelson Field presented the results of a year-long study her firm had conducted to determine the answer to the question of TV, Facebook, or YouTube. They used some very sophisticated technology to study how people watched or didn't watch ads. For the purposes of brevity, I'm going to summarize some of their findings, but if you'd like the details, the entire study is available online. The overriding conclusion of the study was that there is a clear, direct relationship between attention paid to advertising and sales. In other words, the more someone pays attention to your ad, the more likely it is to increase sales. This should be surprising to no one. What's interesting is that the study found that people pay more attention to an ad on television than they do to the same ad on YouTube or Facebook. The research found that TV has a much higher rate of active viewing, about twice that of YouTube and about 15 times that of Facebook. One of the important findings of the study is that coverage, the amount of the screen that the ad covers, is a key component of effectiveness. In fact, coverage is the primary driver of attention and sales, accounting for about 70% of the effect. According to the findings, the primary reason TV has more active viewing and consequently more attention and more sales value is that it covers 100% of the screen, while the same ad on YouTube covers about 30% and on Facebook about 10%. According to Dr. Nelson Field, TV is around 3 times more effective in terms of initial sales than Facebook and has impact for 10 times longer. From an advertising standpoint, at the core of the digital delusion was the belief that online advertising would be more effective than traditional advertising because it would be interactive. In fact, display ads are usually reported to have an overall click rate of about 5 clicks in 10,000 ads served. This is not interactivity. This is absence of interactivity. Solve Media, a company that measures this stuff, says you are more likely to complete US Navy SEAL training than click on a banner ad. This delusion has led to consequences that no one could have foreseen. As we sit here today, online advertising is a train wreck of historic proportions. About half of what is paid for is not even visible. Fraud is out of control. Corruption is rampant. Somewhere between 600 million and 1.5 billion web-enabled devices are running ad blockers, depending on whose numbers you choose to believe. Doc Searles, author of The Intention Economy, says this is the largest boycott of anything in the history of humanity. Online advertising is hated by consumers, suspected by advertisers, barely sustainable for publishers, and trusted by no one. Let me be specific. Remember, we were told that online advertising would be more relevant to consumers and therefore more welcome by consumers? Well, it's exactly the opposite. Of 13 different forms of advertising studied, the 8 most disliked are all forms of online advertising. Only 52% of traffic on the web is reported to be human. The rest are bots, scrapers, hackers, spammers, and other impersonators. Dr. Roberto Cavazos is a professor of economics at the University of Baltimore. Recently, he participated in a study of online ad fraud. When the results were released, Dr. Cavazos said, "I have studied the economic costs of fraud in many sectors for decades, and I was left stunned by the scale of fraud in online advertising." Dr. Cavazos' study estimated that ad fraud is a $30 billion business. Fast Company magazine reported recently it was a $50 billion business. According to the World Federation of Advertisers, within 6 years, fraud may be the second largest source of criminal activity in the world after drug trafficking. The truth is, nobody knows the true extent of online ad fraud. The whole art and science of fraud is to avoid detection. The only ad frauds we know about are the ones we've been able to detect. In other words, the ones that aren't very good. Every time we think we have a handle on fraud, it turns out the fraudsters are 3 steps ahead of us. If you want to make a lot of money quick, get into the ad fraud business. Here's a chart from Hewlett-Packard showing us why ad fraud is so popular. It has the highest return of any online criminal activity, and essentially no one is ever prosecuted for it. Just for another perspective on how pervasive online fraud is, in a 12-month period spanning the end of 2017 and the beginning of 2018, Facebook removed 2.8 billion fake accounts. That's 3 times as many fake accounts as there are human beings in the Western Hemisphere. According to the CEO of the Association of National Advertisers in the US, because of fraud, viewability problems, and the cost of ad tech, only 25 cents of every online ad dollar ever reaches a consumer. But, say the experts, digital advertising is so much more efficient than traditional advertising, with the precision targeting enabled by huge amounts of data that they collect and by the tracking that they do. They can reach the right person at the right place at the right time with the right message, is what they tell us. For years, I've been arguing against this logic. In 2012, I wrote, "Big brands need big reach, not the return of finer and finer targeting." In 2013, I wrote, "One of the great benefits of mass media is that it lacks precision targeting. It reaches all the users in your category." Well, here's how wrong I was. In 2013, the CEO of Procter & Gamble, the world's largest advertiser, told us that digital is incredibly effective and we're doing more. By then, P&G had moved over 1/3 of its ad dollars online. In 2014, P&G's CFO told us that effectiveness and the consumer impact of our advertising spending will be well ahead of the previous year because of our optimized media mix, more digital, more mobile, more search, more social presence. And what was the result of all this precision-targeted, digital optimized media brilliance? In a 12-month period, P&G sales dropped an astounding 8 They lost $6 billion in sales. P&G shocked the marketing world by announcing that they were discontinuing their precision-targeted advertising on Facebook. And what did P&G's chief marketing officer have to say? We targeted too much. Advertisers spend $500 billion a year on advertising. You'd think they'd take the time to know their business, but there's convincing evidence that they're alarmingly out of touch. ThinkBox, the trade organization in the UK, the TV trade organization in the UK, commissioned a study a few years ago comparing advertisers' assumptions about consumer behavior with the facts of consumer behavior. Let's have a look at some of their findings. They asked how many minutes a day they thought people spent watching video on demand. The ad experts said 81 minutes. The actual number was 8 minutes. The experts were off by 900%. They asked how many minutes per day people watch subscription video on demand, like Netflix. The experts said 84 minutes. The actual number was 11 minutes. The experts were off by 600%. They asked how many minutes a day the average person spent with YouTube. The experts said 62 minutes. The correct number was 16, off by almost 300%. Advertisers in the US are just as misinformed. A study released in 2016 showed that among US advertising and marketing executives, when asked what % of video watching time was spent with television, they said 25%. The actual number was 82%. They were asked what proportion of video viewing was done on a smartphone. They estimated 18%. The answer was 2%, wrong by 800%. The obvious question is, how can people who work in an industry that's conducted and constructed on the basis of media behavior be so astoundingly misinformed? Every day, hundreds of millions of dollars are committed based on the supposition that marketing people know the facts and are spending money wisely, and yet they are misinformed to a degree that is mind-boggling. There are a few reasons for this. Here's one of them. We live in a different world from our customers. Have a look at this. This chart is from 2016, and it compares UK advertisers' social media and online behaviors to that of real people. As you can see, we live in a very different online world. Now, there are many people who disagree with me about the digital delusion, so I often invite them to become scientists, to do their own experiment, to do what I call the shopping test. I tell them to go to the biggest supermarket in their neighborhood, walk up and down the aisles, take out a piece of paper and write a list of all the products and all the brands they can find that were built by online advertising. All the brands of toothpaste and beer and cereal and soap and soda and snacks and cheese and shampoo. And they usually find what I found. They don't have a list. Yes, there are some big web-native brands that online advertising may have helped build, Google and Facebook. But how about the 98% of brands in the world that aren't free, like Google and Facebook, and don't live on the web? Online advertising is 20 years old. After 20 years of life, TV had built hundreds, if not thousands, of huge consumer-facing brands in the US. Where are the brands of soda and beer and cars and running shoes and paper towels and tires and fast food that were built by online advertising? The next delusion I want to talk about is the brand delusion. I believe that building a strong brand should be every marketer's primary objective. And the highest goal of advertising is to create a strong brand. I'm sure most of you agree. But as usual, our industry has taken those truths and distorted them into silly fantasies. There's a widespread fantasy in our business that consumers are in love with brands, that consumers want to have brand experiences and brand relationships and be personally engaged with brands and read branded storytelling and co-create with brands. Let's listen to Saatchi and Saatchi's description of what they call love marks. They reach your heart as well as your mind, creating an intimate, emotional connection that you just can't live without. It's very touching. Unfortunately, it's bullshit. In fact, according to a recent study by Havas Media, in Europe and the US, people said they would not care if 81% of brands disappeared. A recent study by Nielsen reported that only 8% of consumers in the US consider themselves firmly committed brand loyalists. And the tendency to be brand loyal is dropping precipitously. Consumers say they are now 46% more likely to try new brands than they were 5 years ago. Nielsen says the marketing tactics and investments rarely reflect these realities. One consequence of the brand delusion is that we've been spending almost 10 years and billions of dollars on the social media fantasy, exhorting people to join the conversation about our brands. What I want to know is, where is this conversation? All you have to do is go to a Facebook page or a Twitter feed, and if you can read, you can see no one is having conversations about brands. Facebook is the biggest bait and switch in the history of marketing. It was the thing that was going to replace advertising. Instead, it has become the world's largest repository of that which it was supposed to replace, traditional paid advertising. An article in the Harvard Business Review by several marketing professors said, across 16 studies, we found no evidence that following a brand on social media changes people's purchasing behavior. And yet there are people in our business who still believe that consumers are in love with brands. You go to their Twitter profiles, I'm passionate about brands. You're what? Dude, get a girlfriend. Now, once again, let me state the obvious. Yes, having a strong brand should be every marketer's primary objective. And yes, the highest goal of advertising is to create a strong brand. But that's it. Despite what we hear, for the most part, consumers do not want to have a conversation with or about your brand, or an authentic relationship with it, or engage with it, or co-create with it. If you're a marketer and you believe people love your brand because they happen to buy it, you're headed for trouble. Of course, brand preferences exist, and that's what advertising is striving to create. But brand preference is a far cry from brand love. Brand love is largely a juvenile fantasy. What we call brand love is simply habit, convenience, mild satisfaction, or easy availability. Now, are some consumers strongly attached to a few brands? Sure we are. But I promise you, if Pepsi would disappear tomorrow, most Pepsi brand lovers would switch to Coke with very little psychological damage. Nike loyalists would throw on a pair of Adidas without having to enter rehab, and Big Mac lovers would cheerfully eat at KFC without the need for counseling. think it's very wise to assume that consumers don't love our motor oil, our wet wipes, or our frozen chicken strips. In fact, a smart marketer believes none of that. She assumes that she has to prove her brand's value to her customers every day of the year. She takes nothing for granted. She does not believe that there are hordes of brand ambassadors out there in cyberland advocating for her brand. If there are a few, that's fine, but she's not going to count on it. The point is this: our brands are very important to us marketers and not all that important to most consumers. Finally, I have one last delusion I want to talk about, and that is the age delusion. One of the practices of the ad industry that I've never understood is why we spend so much of our time, money, and energy talking to young people and so little talking to older people. According to Nielsen, people over 50 are the most valuable generation in the history of marketing. So why do we ignore them? In order to understand this phenomenon, I think we need to talk about the makeup of the ad industry. Walk into any ad agency in the US, and in 10 seconds, something will become obvious. Everyone is young. While people over 50 comprise 47% of the adults in the US, they comprise 6% of agency employees. The excuse we're always given for this is that young people are just more creative. Or as the insufferable Mark Zuckerberg likes to say, young people are just smarter. I would like to challenge this notion. To do so, I would like to go outside the advertising industry, which flatters itself with the idea of creativity, to other fields where creativity is absolutely essential. Let's look at the year 2017. We'll start with the Nobel Prize. There's only one Nobel Prize in the creative field. It's the Prize for Literature. It went to Kazuo Ishiguro, who is 64. The Pulitzer Prize is awarded in several creative fields. The Pulitzer for Drama went to Lynn Nottage, who is 54. The Pulitzer for History went to Heather Ann Thompson, age 55. The Pulitzer for Poetry went to Tyhimba Jess, age 53. Meanwhile, at the Oscars, the Academy Awards, 3 of the 4 winners for acting were over 50. Frances McDormand, who was 60, Gary Oldman, who is 59, Allison Janney, 58, and the 4th, young Sam Rockwell, turned 50 the following month. The Oscar for Best Director went to Guillermo del Toro, who is 53. Now let's move to television. The Emmy for Best Drama Series went to Handmaid's Tale. The novel was written by Margaret Atwood, who is 79 and is a creative consultant on the show. The Best Comedy Series went to Veep, executive produced by Julia Louis-Dreyfus, 57. She also won for Best Actress. Best Limited Series went to Big Little Lies, created by David E. Kelley, 62. Best Supporting Actress was Ann Dowd, 67. Best Supporting Actor was John Lithgow, 73. Best Supporting Actor in a Comedy Series went to Alec Baldwin, 60. So let's recap. People over 50 are creative enough to dominate the Nobels, the Pulitzers, the Oscars, and the Emmys, but are not creative enough to write a fucking banner ad. I guarantee you, not one of these brilliant, talented people could get a job in an ad agency in the US today. Not one. Now let's look at the facts about older consumers. In the US, people over 50 are responsible for over half of all consumer spending. They outspend the average consumer in nearly every category: food, household furnishings, entertainment, personal care, automotive. They account for 55% of all consumer packaged goods sales. They dominate 94% of consumer packaged goods categories. They outspend other adults online 2 to 1 on a per capita basis. They have a net worth about 3 times that of other generations. They buy about 57% of all new cars. They control about 70% of the wealth in the US. If they were their own country, Americans over 50 would be the 3rd largest economy in the world, bigger than the entire economies of Germany, Japan, or India. And the future, between now and 2030, the population of adults over 50 will grow at about 3 times the rate of adults under 50. So let me ask you a question. Do you really think it's a good idea to ignore these people? And yet, according to Nielsen, people over 50 are the target for between 5 and 10% of marketing activity in the US. While everyone in marketing is obsessed about millennials, we're actually going through one of the greatest demographic changes in human history, and it's being completely ignored. This chart from the United Nations demonstrates an astounding demographic change that is occurring in just 100 years. In the year 1950, there were 3 times as many people in the world under the age of 5 as over the age of 65. By 2050, there'll be twice as many people over the age of 65 as there will be under 5. Our population is aging at a remarkable rate. Here in Russia, the discrepancy is even greater. While worldwide, the median population is 29.6, here it's 39.6. And as you can see, demand doesn't begin to peak until about the age of 30. But we in the advertising and marketing business have invented all kinds of convenient bullshit for why we ignore mature people. The real reason we ignore older people is we hate them. We hate older people. Advertising people are young. They like the excitement of youth, not the boredom of middle age or the frailties of old age. We can't build ourselves a hot advertising career by talking to old farts. Consequently, we have invented all kinds of bullshit to justify our malpractice. The neglect of mature consumers and pandering to young people is nothing but narcissism disguised as strategy. It is marketing by selfie stick. Okay, I'm almost done. Despite our veneer of creativity, the advertising and marketing business is one of the most imitative and conformist businesses in the world. Once something becomes trendy, it is very difficult, in fact dangerous, for someone to go against the grain. I could never have said to my clients 6 years ago, when I was the CEO of an agency, what I said here today. It would have been too dangerous. Now, change is inevitable. Things are always changing. I'm not suggesting for a minute that we should ignore digital media or ignore young people or ignore millennials, but I am saying we need to exercise a little more discretion and a little more modesty when we claim we know things that we don't really know. We need to get some perspective back and get over our obsessions and delusions. We need to keep an open mind and admit that there is a substantial difference between reality and wishful thinking. My advice to you is to not listen to big mouths like me. Give yourself the wonderful freedom of skepticism. Dig out the facts for yourself. Nobody is smarter than the facts. Our industry has been spending too much time on another planet, and I believe it's time for us to get back down to earth. Thank you very much.